Hi friends, my name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. So I don't know if you've been following Twitter lately, but there was a hashtag Marc Lamont Hill, who's a contributor for CNN. And so I thought I'd have a look and see what's happening there. And apparently Marc Lamont Hill said something pro-Palestinian rights. Imagine being against apartheid Israel, but anyway, against apartheid in Israel. He said something pro-Palestinian, which from what I recall was fairly harmless. But of course, if you're saying anything that is indirectly or directly critical of Israel, you're immediately labeled anti-Semitic. So of course the slurs started happening, and of course some right-wing group apparently had a go at him, probably just friends of AIPAC or AIPAC itself. You know, there's a whole Hasbara of people, of a Hasbara that's really promoting the Israel narrative that get online, and there's some that are even paid to change, you know, the narrative in favor of the situation in Israel. And so anyway, Marc Lamont Hill got fired from CNN. So that gives you a little insight, a little sort of insight into the influence of you know, the Israel lobby. Anyway, so if you can stick up for Marc Lamont Hill on Twitter, say some positive things about being able, you know, that it should be fine to be against an apartheid situation. It should be fine to be against an occupation of Palestinians, and it's a brutal occupation. So, you know, if you can get on Twitter and say some positive things, that's always helpful when people are being dumped on and made an example of. This whole thing that it's anti-Semitic to criticize an apartheid state is just ridiculous. And I think, you know, people buy into that, sadly, because I don't know, they just don't understand the situation. And also, you know, right-wing groups and conservatives and the left, the liberal, the fake left, do it too, because there's a lot of Congress people who get donations from AIPAC, which is the Israel lobby. So, you know, it's a big no-no to say anything critical at all of a government that has set up you know, there's actually a separate situation, a second-class Palestinian, and, you know, and Israeli citizens are first class. And they've separated, and you know, Palestinians are basically oppressed to the nth degree. You check out the Empire Files and see all the different programs about Palestine and what's happening for them, and you'll understand why it's so outrageous what's happening to Palestinians, that it's shocking that more people aren't speaking out against the brutal occupation and killing of Palestinians. So anyway, so that's that. And another thing that's very interesting I found today was apparently in Pennsylvania, the Jill Stein lawsuit was successful, and now Pennsylvania has to have paper ballots. Now, why is paper ballots important? Well, because, you know, if you follow what happens in any election in the United States, there's a lot of shenanigans go on, and electronic voter machines have been proven to be remotely hacked. I think even an 11-year-old was managed to be able to hack those machines. It's just too easy to fiddle with the numbers, too easy to fiddle with the votes. And you can fiddle with paper ballots, of course, like people could, you know, but I mean, if you've got proper scrutineers, which we have here in Australia, we have paper ballots, and we have preferential voting, or ranked choice voting as they call it in the United States, and I couldn't imagine having anything but paper ballots. I think the US used to have paper ballots, but I'm assuming that people realized that they could hack into electronic machines, and that's why they went that way. So, you know, the US loves to criticize Venezuela. Venezuela's got incredibly transparent elections. The US does not. You regularly see progressive, you know, people that even the Democratic Party well, the Democratic Party is as bad as the GOP when it comes to electoral fraud. So anyway, the whole system over there in the US is pretty awful, the electoral system. But I think we have a fairly healthy electoral system here. I mean, if anything remotely like what goes on in the US happened in Australia, it would be a scandal of the highest proportions. I mean, it truly would be. Like, I'm constantly shocked at what goes on in the US with people being, like, people running off with ballots in the middle of the night, and voter purging and all that kind of stuff, and cross-check and all these different things that are just ways of keeping, you know, black voters from voting, and also just, you know, I mean, it happened, I think, to Cynthia Nixon, you know, and it happens all over the place in the US. In Australia, if anything even slightly like that happened, it would just be absolutely all over the newspapers, hopefully, and it would just be everywhere. It would be unthinkable. So, I mean, because we take things very seriously here with voting. And the ranked choice voting is a wonderful thing in Australia. So I'm looking forward to more and more states in the US adopting paper ballots, and the next thing I hope to see is ranked choice voting, because without it you don't have a democracy. You really don't have a democracy. I mean, the fact that in the US they don't allow anybody else but a GOP candidate and a Democratic candidate or candidates to debate, and they actually keep Jill Stein and people like that out of debates, is just outrageous. And the reason they do is because they're frightened of, you know, they're frightened of what these candidates are going to say, that these candidates that aren't the duopoly are going to say things that, people want, you know, like free healthcare and free education and elimination of student debt and all that kind of stuff. You know, they don't, the duopoly don't want people to hear that sort of thing. And the, you know, Democratic Party has absolutely no intentions of ever moving away from their neoliberal, corporate-loving, warmongering position. They're completely lost. They're a lost party. And so, you know, I mean, people should just ditch the duopoly and start a grassroots movement. I don't think voting solves everything. I actually think grassroots movements are the way to go. But you can also do things too if you find a candidate that isn't going to become an imperialist or isn't pro-Israel and that kind of thing, that's actually progressive and isn't afraid to learn about the modern economy, understanding MMT and things like that. Excuse me, I've still got my virus. You know, if they're, you know, actually progressive candidates, then you know, by all means, support them. But you know, there has to be a grassroots movement of stuff, a non-violent grassroots movement. Otherwise, nothing's ever going to change, really. So if you're whatever state, if you're in the US and you know, your state doesn't have paper ballots and it doesn't have ranked choice voting, then do whatever you can to see if you can do what Jill Stein did. I don't know how much money it costs. Everything costs so much money there. The fact that when things are not right and people have to raise, excuse me, millions of dollars, when people have to raise millions of dollars to have a vote recount, I mean, that's unheard of here. If you had some strange thing happen, they just recount it. You wouldn't have to take anybody to court or pay a lot of money to do that. That's just crazy. It's just so sad when I look at how elections are run in the US. It's insane. Having to have so much money to be able to run is outrageous. I know some good people that would like to run, but they can't afford to. In the US, I'm talking about. Anyway, hopefully we'll never ever become like that here, but who knows? That we have a full-on xenophobic, racist, right-wing government at the moment with Scott Morrison, and they're doing their darndest to undo everything. And you know, people get emboldened by outright right-wingers like, say, Trump and people like that. You know, there's more and more fascism, fascist-leaning, or outright fascist sort of people running for office today, which is just really awful. And that's what happens when you get massive social inequality. You know, you get more and more sort of blaming of minority groups and, you know, vilifying minority groups, and then you end up with, you know, sort of right-wingers like Bolsonaro in Argentina. Was it Brazil? Brazil, sorry. You know, you get people like that who are outright fascists, and there'll be more and more of that the more and more social inequality continues, because people start to do desperate things, and then they start to turn on migrants and all that sort of stuff, instead of turning on the governments that are actually creating this social inequality. You know, they turn on each other, and that's exactly how governments like it. They like people to be divided and fighting with each other. So anyway, hopefully the US will go the way of paper ballots, who knows? And hopefully we will always be that way here in Australia. So anyhow, that's all I really wanted to say. I just thought I'd pop on and say a couple of things, and now that I've had some time and I'm not doing, unfortunately, I'll just give you a little update. The government in Tasmania did a lot of shenanigans in the last couple of days. I won't go into it, but they did everything they could not to address that trans and gender diverse legislation that Transforming Tasmania, the group that I've been working with the last 4 or 5 months. They did their best not to address it in the upper house. It passed the lower house, the legislation. I've spoken about it in a couple of videos ago. But they've been doing everything they can and making up all sorts of stories. It's just awful, really. But, you know, it's a very conservative, right-wing, sort of homophobic, transphobic government. I mean, I can be frank and just say that because it's all out there now. They just are, sadly. And so anyway, they said that they would address it in March. That's when they said they would look at it again. Meanwhile, there'll probably be a whole lot of transphobic and gender phobic, you know, gender diverse phobic stuff, and for the next few months, that's what happens. You know, just like the marriage survey that happened a year or so ago. There was months and months of homophobia and transphobia. So anyway, that's what's happening there. And so I guess for a little bit I've got a bit of a break from going in and meeting up with politicians and all that sort of stuff. I'm, you know, I'm really more, you could say I'm more of an ally because I'm not trans, but I do what I can to support this work, and my partner has written legislation, which is, I think is excellent, and people have commented on it, given her compliments about it. It had some tweaking and stuff from other people, but it was very, very good, because that used to be one of her jobs in another life, writing legislation. So anyway, so that's not going to happen till March sometime, so there'll just be more and more lobbying, more going to different ones, different politicians, and in the upper house and explaining things, and hopefully they won't fail us when push comes to shove. Anyhow, so that's really all I wanted to say. So I hope that this finds you well. Thanks so much for watching. I always appreciate your comments, so please feel free to leave comments. Try and keep them civil. And please hit the subscribe button if you're not subscribed, and click the notifications bell. Otherwise, you won't receive notifications when there's updates. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time, bye for now.